Okay, this tomorrow is 5 o'clock. If we could make a start. Attendance at meetings is as it is. Any declarations of interest? To confirm the minutes, firstly, the 8th of February, can that move as a true record? It's seconded. Questions, comments, matters arising? Next minutes from the 13th of February, moved it to a true record. Seconded. Questions, comments? Item 4, matters referred to Cabinet. There are no such matters. Item 5, issues arising from scrutiny. There are no such issues. Takes us to key decisions. 6A, Council Plan Capital Spend, which is in next name.
Thank you, Bill. Can I read the recommendation in paragraph 8 for the reasons set out in paragraph 9? This paper considers this year's performance as far as highway maintenance and highway schemes is concerned. The outcome of the key performance indicators as far as relevant to Darlington when measured against national criteria, especially public satisfaction in our roads and pavements, but also how that should inform our priorities for 2018-2019. So formally what we're doing in this paper with this recommendation is releasing the monies for road schemes, junction improvements and highway maintenance, including potholes, which I shall return to in a moment, for the next financial year. I think it's telling that if you look in bold terms, the base amount that we receive from government to spend on highway maintenance and on road schemes has declined significantly since 2010. I calculate it's gone down from 2.9 million in 2010 to 2.3 million next year. And when you consider the impact as well of inflation over that period of time, that is a significant reduction in expenditure for Darlington on our highways. However, we have still been able to make substantial investment in our roads, and will continue to do so next year because of all the hard work that officers in the Highways Department and elsewhere have done with very successful bids, both for capital schemes through the T20 Combined Authority and also directly to government, but also money as well as far as road maintenance is concerned. And I'd like to thank them again for all the work they tirelessly do, because it is not a lot of people obviously see that work, but it is really the fruits of it we see around our streets today. Can I draw members' attention to paragraph 19 on page 13? That sets out our performance looking at public satisfaction, and you can see that for the most part Darlington is almost back bang in the middle. We're neither, for the most part, at the top end of public satisfaction nationally, but neither are we near the bottom. We're very much, for the most part, in the middle. I think everyone must be aware, after the really severe weather that we've had over the last week or so, just how that has impacted in short order on the state of some of our roads and pavements. That's not just an issue for Darlington. You're actually just sharing with me his what he's seen in Tyneside recently. Things equally bad, if not worse, up there. The combination of the water, freezing conditions, getting into the roads have really done a great deal of damage. Now we know from our research that actually, in terms of the state of most of our major roads, things aren't too bad relatively, but we do know we do have a particular issue with our minor roads. They're classified roads, some of our estate roads. And so therefore the £500,000 from money that we're putting into dealing with those roads in the coming year, together with pothole money that we bid for, we don't know how much that is yet, is particularly timely. As well, of course, as the schemes that we have in for next year, tackling congestion, places like Hockerton on the A68, as well as dealing with congestion on the eastern side of town. So there's a great deal of work that has been done and will be done in this report. As I say, I think the focus on potholes and road maintenance and the added investment we're putting in there is particularly timely, but I was always happy to take any questions.
Questions?
Yes, I just wondered whether once we get the pothole fund, whether we will, as members, get a schedule of where the work is likely to be carried out. I think as ward members we're all getting complaints about them. I accept that you know, the minor roads, but Grange Road in particular is very bad, and that's one of the major routes. And I would hope that if we're doing a priority list, that maybe we can look at that. I mean, it's really shocking. It's one of the worst.
I've seen Grange Road. I see Grange Road every day, and I'm very conscious that around Blackwell Lane is in particularly poor condition.
Yeah. And it's a safety aspect as well, isn't it? You know, because cyclists go in there.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
so just as members, if we can get a schedule once we get the money and where.
I think it's fair to say, and the director will correct me if I'm wrong, but some of this work will be fairly reactive. So there will be some large planned pieces of work there in here. I mean, for example, I concentrate on one because it's in my ward, which is Stockton Road from the Highland Laddie up to the Stockton Road roundabout. Those are the big schemes. A lot of the smaller work will be done as assessed.
Yeah.
So it will be done on an assessment and then an action basis. So it may not be possible to roll out, I know it won't be for the whole year, because it will be reactive, and we'd encourage ward members and residents, whether it's through the website or by email, to let us know about some particular grot spots as far as potholes and damage is concerned.
Yeah, in the past I've asked for a copy of the pothole policy, and I've yet to see the pothole policy. Just wondering, I have been told that it has to go to the second layer of the tarmacking before they really consider pothole, filling it in. Do we think, though, the possibility of a stitch in time might be cheaper and more cost effective than allowing it to get that deep when damage it can be done to cars if they're driving over particularly deep potholes? And another thing, I was at Sunderland Civic Centre, and one of the things I noticed, they had the paving up at the Civic Centre on the different levels, and I noticed with the severe weather and the salt, some of the grouting was lifting. Is it possible we can have a check around the town centre to make sure none of the grouting in the smaller areas are lifting because of this severe weather?
Well, there will be regular town centre inspections, and there are. Councillor Carey, so I'm sure that will take on. There are clear criteria. I wouldn't call it a policy, but there are clear criteria in terms of depth and in terms of when a pothole is sufficient to require work. You'll have also seen from the report that the micro asphalt policy and the work we're putting into that is going to help lengthen the life of a lot of our minor roads. So a lot of the work that we will be doing isn't just fixing damaged roads, it's also trying to extend the life of the roads that we have at the moment.
Just in relation to delivery in 2017 and 18, I'd like to particularly welcome the continuation of the pedestrian training Bikeability Plus and the junior road safety activities. And I also would hope that we can encourage more primary schools to take part in that. And then turning to the improvements, it's on page 23. Residents in my ward and any users in the town centre really will probably be cheering at the inclusion of the Victoria Road Tukin crossing because it's been a danger spot for some time. And I recently ran it across a woman at the Darlington Memorial Hospital and had her foot right over there. So I'm looking forward with just about everybody else in that section of town to that upgrade.
So I welcome the comments. Bikeability money is money again that the council has bid for and won the bid. I'm not sure how many years we've got to run on that, but we continue because it's been part of the demonstration, cycle demonstration town initiative that we had a few years ago that was so positive, had positive impacts, and so bikeability is something we've absolutely committed to. Again, thank you for your comments on Victoria Road, and that will be part of wider upgrading of Victoria Road, its length from the roundabout up to the station, in terms of look as well as in terms of safety, because I think we know that area really does need to be lifted.
Item 6, private sector environmental crowd involvement.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Can I move the recommendation in paragraph 7 for the reasons set out in paragraph 8? This is an issue that we promised as a cabinet, and I promised we would look at way back in June 2016 when we took medium-term financial plan through, and there were very sad but inevitable reductions to street scene, both in terms of the work that was being undertaken, but also in terms of enforcement. Because what we know is that there are these 45 authorities around the country which very successfully use private sector companies to undertake litter and dog fouling enforcement, and some give the private sector a wider role as far as enforcement is concerned. We do have an enforcement operation at the moment, but it's very small, and we need to substantially step up our performance because yes, we're putting money, as members will recall, through the budget, more money back into streets to address the litter collection, and also to address cleaning our streets away of the dog fouling and back lanes. We have our brilliant street champions who do such a magnificent job voluntarily around the town, day in, day out, picking up litter. But I think we owe it to our workforce, we owe it to the street champions, we owe it to the people of the town to make sure we're doing everything we can as far as enforcement is concerned. And at the moment, frankly, we've just not been able to do that. I know there's cross-party support, certainly from Councillor Lee and others, for this idea. I went down to Doncaster to have a look at the scheme down there, talked to the officers for their feedback on how they felt that private company was operating. Councillor Carson went to Barnsley as well to get some feedback as well. So we have looked at other schemes. What we know is there's no way that as a local authority we can replicate the performance or the infrastructure that these companies have built up over a number of years. They've invested heavily in, particularly in the software that's needed to support the enforcement, but also in the equipment and the body cams, and also in the training. It will take us many years to get up to the standard of those private companies, and frankly, looking at the state of some of our streets and some of our back lanes, and particularly at the town centre and around the town centre, we can't afford to wait. So I know that these schemes sometimes bring some negative publicity, but all the people, and I know some people who I've engaged with recently have had some reservations about, well, will this firm go unfairly chasing after people? I don't think people need, from what we've seen in Doncaster and Barnsley, I don't think people need to have that worry. At the end of the day, the only people who need to be worried about this scheme are people who thoughtlessly litter, and I'm certainly not shying away from ensuring that those people, wherever possible, get these fines of £75. But what we're proposing is a tendering process, a formal tendering process, which will lead to a 6-month trial, and if that 6-month trial is successful, then we will, as a council, extend the scheme for a number of years. I think it's right to see whether the scheme is right for Darlington. I think it will be, but let's see, let's test and see, does it have the same impact it's had, for example, in Doncaster, where there's been over a 20% drop in the number of complaints about littering and dog fouling, and 20% reduction in littering as well. So it has had beneficial effects where it's been tried elsewhere. I think I also need to be clear that this is in effect a bolt-on to an existing to the council and the work of the council. No one's going to be laid off. There's no one needs to be cheaped over as a result of this work. Members will see that sitting alongside this is a reorganisation of our enforcement role more widely, so to concentrate on all the other areas of enforcement that isn't covered by littering and dog fouling, and staff will transfer into that. So I'm positive about this. I think it has the potential to make a great deal of difference, but I think we need to recognise, the final point I've made, is this is not the end of a process by any means. We need to fundamentally change the culture in Darlington towards littering, and particularly towards dog fouling. I anticipate this having a big impact on littering around the town centre in particular. Dog fouling maybe less so, and that comes up, as we all know as ward councillors and as officers, again and again and again. The vast majority of the people in this town are disgusted by the amount of dog fouling that we see around the town. The council's not responsible for that. Most residents aren't responsible for that. It's a minority of irresponsible dog owners, and we need to look at other measures, working with the law-abiding residents to make sure that dog fouling, as far as the dog owner is concerned, is seen as socially unacceptable in the way that it is at the moment. So the beginning of the process, but one I think that will deliver real benefits for the town.
Yes, and certainly I welcome this, and I'm quite sure our group will as well. I think we've got to send out a very strong message to both the people who drop litter, but certainly dog fouling, and I think certainly on the Darlington Facebook page, you know, the number of issues that are raised there, and particularly now the snow's melted. I think that, you know, and it is appalling, as you say, the responsible dog owners do clear it back to their animals. But I think also the sad thing for me is that school children are very conscious about litter, and most of the schools encourage the children, and they're aware, and they do pick up the litter. When they get past 14 or 15, they just seem to disregard everything that they've learned before. But I think it's a generation of parents as well. You see them walking along the street, and if they open sweets, they throw the sweet papers on the floor. And we've got to get this message across. You know, it costs us money to collect all the litter, and we could that money could be spent on other things that we need to do as a local authority if people were more responsible. And if it's the way we've got to go, well, then so be it. So we have to support this.
Just 2 points really, maybe technical questions rather than me. We're talking about the team, the environmental team will cover nuisance parking. I just wonder if you could tell me what you mean by that, in light of the problems there are around the town about parking on the grass verges and damages to our verges, blocking footpaths for vehicles, whatever. If you could just cover that. And the second point is, could you clarify the last sentence or so in paragraph 16 about shortfalls in capacity from the substantive workforce being transferred across our... I just don't understand what we're getting at there, Nick.
Okay.
Does it mean our guys are going to do their job or their guys are going to do our job? Or... No? Well, if you don't know, and that doesn't say it, that's not a bad question, then, is it?
Much of a question to begin with, actually. Do you understand what you're on about, Nick?
What we're talking about is that we could use the company to cover other work that we do at the moment where we have a shortfall in capacity,
Right.
and we'd have to pay for that.
I understand that now.
But in terms of the workforce that we have at the moment, the 1.5 members of staff that we have doing litter enforcement, that 1.5 posts will transfer into the wider enforcement team. That's why TUPE doesn't apply. No one will be TUPE'd from the scheme, from our current workforce, into the work of this company.
I'm really grateful that the report includes some information about how under 18-year-olds, under 18 treated. But I would have liked to have had information on how the authority will deal with second offenders and also vulnerable adults, to those that are maybe mentally ill or homeless. And secondly, will there be any sort of education campaign? I think Councillor Scott touched on young people, but will there be any sort of education campaign launched by the council or with partners to inform young people and indeed all residents in Darlington that not only like the dog fouling and the litter, it's not only antisocial, but it's also against the law. So I think we need to raise the game, because chewing gum, cigarette butts, and also packaging, that's the litter that people are going to get these penalty notices over, plus other things. But just to let people know what the expectations are. And also, I'd like to echo what you said. The vast majority of residents don't litter. They pick their dog muck up. So it's really, I agree that we need this, because it's those persistent people who need to actually have something more than just a
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think Sydney's partly covered the point I was going to make, and that is, the vast majority of people in this town don't litter. The vast majority of young people don't litter, and the vast majority of littering is not done by young people. But I would agree with we need education, but I would agree with what Councillor Hughes has said. We've reached a point of a hard core where enforcement is the only way. You know, and I'm speaking as a ward councillor, but also with responsibility to the town centre. I need to say, Mr. Wildsmith and the street scene team have been making tremendous efforts there, but we need to take a further step, and I think enforcement has got to be explored to really make that that step. The final point really on sort of dog poo and dog owners. Everyone will know I'm a new dog, and I'm not a new dog. I'm a new dog owner, and you know, it's something. You know, obviously I do. I pick up the poo, and I wouldn't say that, but I do. But I do reflect, not as frequently, about how times have changed. And I often tell the story of, you know, when I had a dog in 1982 in Middlesbrough, life was a bit different. Now it is socially unacceptable, but there is that hard core, and you are seeing it when the snow's gone, that we need to take action. And I suppose the question, Councillor, and we've discussed this before, do you think we need to go a bit further and explore ensuring that people always have a bag with them? Well,
£100 fine in Swindon.
Anne-Marie.
Yeah, could we also look at and address the other issue that comes from dog owners? Some of them do pick up their dog dirt and then they discard the bag in other people's gardens on railings. And when I first got elected, there was a dog poo tree in our ward that was on Morrison's land, and it cost thousands to bring a private company down from Scotland to clean it up. I do believe that it was only 2 or 3 people who were actually flinging their bags over into this land and catching it on the tree, but I'm sorry, that sort of behaviour is just as bad as leaving the dog poo on the pavement.
It's like they get council rules. I think everyone thinks. Firstly, fully endorse what Councillor Scott said and Chris had to say about generational attitudes. I mean, this is another anecdote. I'm sorry about Chris now. Had a conversation with a resident a couple of days ago who was doubtful whether this was going to work, this scheme was going to work and make a difference, because there aren't enough, and this resident, quite a bit younger than me, because there's not enough bins in Darlington. I said, okay, well, if you tell me where you feel we need more bins, obviously we can look at seeing whether one's needed there. Oh, there should be a bin in every street. I said, oh, well, right, well, there's never been a bin in every street. You know, they're targeted in particular places where there's high volume. Oh, well, if there's not a bin in every street, people are just going to drop the litter, because you're not going to take it home with you, are you? And there's something about sort of a throwaway generation, or throwaway attitude, that if it's not there for me right now, well, it's someone else's responsibility. And it's that, when I say innocent, that's the mindset. That genuinely was the response of our resident. We had a further chat after that about not having the right to litter, which she took on board. But there's a series of there's something about psychology around with this, with both in terms of dog family and in terms of littering, that we need to get further into. Cindy's quite right to remind me about education campaign. I think this will work best if we have a campaign that people are well aware, particularly around the town centre, in the areas around the town centre, in the weeks leading up to the introduction of this scheme, that this scheme is coming in. It's always been wrong and it's always been unacceptable to litter, but I think it would be important to make people particularly aware that actually there will be consequences when you drop that crisp packet, that Greggs wrapper, or that cigarette end after the particular date in September when we bring it in to warn them. I think there'll be greater acceptance as a result. As far as the points you make about young people and people who have complex, chaotic lives, Cindy, those are good points. There are some, there's a sort of a schedule that runs alongside this that will inform the contract that we send out, and I can get you more information about that. But I think it's positive that certainly as far as some of the young people, if they are stopped, rather than fining them, they will be invited to take part in sort of restorative justice, if you like, and do some litter picking rather than parents pay a fine. As far as verges are concerned, that's another massive can of worms, Ian. It is something that Chief Exec, together with some of the ward councils in the West End, have been working on for some time. I'm taking a great interest in that at the moment. Verges as well are rising from this weather. In my patch, in our patch, I'm sure around the town, just a horrendous issue at the moment. And again, we're a minority. Some roads are very narrow and it's very difficult, and all the verges are churned. But over and over again, in estate roads, you see, 20% of the verges absolutely looking like the battle of the Somme, and the rest fine. Because there's certain residents, certain people who visit, maybe people going to schools, who just choose to churn them up and park thoughtlessly. The law is incredibly complicated around that issue, but it's one that we have to respond to, however we do it, whether it's a legal approach, whether it's a maintenance approach, where there's very little money, or whether it's an educational approach. But it's one certainly that we do need to address. Thank you.
Okay. Item 16, Freedom's Office Development, Plot 1, which is the
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Colleagues will recall previous reports on this matter, and the reason for presenting this to you is to both seek approval to commit capital, quite a sizable amount, but I will come back to that, but also seek to progress the build without a head lease, which you may recall we previously sought to put in place in terms of pre-lets, and I'll come on to that. So I've moved the recommendations, but in doing so explain that we've managed to secure in excess of 5 million from both the combined authority and ERDF. We've got some final due diligence checks, but we're highly confident that we've secured that funding. I mentioned before about the issue of pre-let. That has been quite challenging to achieve, and the advice from property professionals in the council is that we should progress without that. But having said that, there is recognition that there is high demand for Grade A office accommodation in this town, and we have quite a bit of interest. Clearly I can't go into that at the moment, but there is quite a lot of interest in this development. In moving the recommendations, I would do it in terms of 4 key reasons. One, this is the final piece nearly the final piece. Many around this table will recall the journey that we've been on. And when I say it's not the final piece, because it mentions plot 1, and if this, and I'm confident it will, if this build goes well and the letting goes well and occupation goes well, there is potential to develop a neighbouring building on the site as well. Second, the reason why I think we need to progress this is it's going to bring more jobs into the centre of Darlington. And as I've discussed before in the context of the town centre, the success of the town centre will not only rely on retail, it will also rely on people working within the town centre, living within the town centre. We've seen that with the DFE building, so this has the potential to have consequential benefits for footfall and therefore the vitality of our town centre. So with that, Chair, I would move the recommendations, and for the reasons outlined, I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions, Hannah?
Well, it's a comment really. We had a briefing on this last evening, and we got quite a lot of information, and I welcome this. I think it's as you say, it's a continuation of the development of the town centre. Obviously the risk is shared by the Tees Valley Combined Authority, which I think needs to be emphasised just for the people in the gallery who perhaps haven't seen the details of the paper. So they share the risks as well as the rewards. Fingers crossed that the ERDF funding does come through, because I think this is beneficial. I think the only thing that I would say, and it was something that was raised last night, that we've got to be careful that it's not a displacement of companies that are already here in the town. It is very attractive because obviously it's close to the railway station. The developments that's already taken place in Central Park are very successful. And it's just really an issue of the parking, which I raised last night. Obviously, part of this is to allow the top floor of the multi-storey car park to be included in the rents for the properties. And we've just got to make sure that the fees for that are very similar to the contract parking in elsewhere in the town, so that they're not seen as that as what's the word that I'm looking, a bribe to get them to come into the town centre. So we've got to be careful about that, just so that there's equanimity. But yes, I think it's a good scheme. Everything is a risk in these days. If we don't do something like this, somebody else will. The fact that the combined authority is supporting it, I think, is very good. And we're not in competition with larger places, as was said last night, the Leeds and Newcastle's. This is something for us in Darlington. We've got a fantastic rail connection. We're close to the A1. And the benefit to the town centre, which is something that we need to be conscious of. We want to need more footfall into the town centre, and this is another opportunity, hopefully, to build on that. So yes, I support this.
We need to be clear that Darlington, as council, is putting the actual money in. Combined authority isn't. They're just making the loan, which they expect to be repaid. I'd imagine it should have been grant funded, but it wasn't. But anyway, Chris.
Heather mentioned the point, she also commented on the financial. Yes, the report does identify that there is a risk, financial risk in this scheme. But I think there's also a risk if you choose not to do it, because as a local authority, we have a responsibility to approach economic development. And I think if we don't do it, we're sort of missing a trick in terms of bringing in jobs and opportunities to the town centre. So I think the report is right to acknowledge there is a risk, but I think we're right to accept the risk and proceed with the scheme.
Yeah, just a response, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the comments, Heather, and I concur with what Bill and Steve said about taking the risk and also the funding structure. We are putting money into this. Displacement, there is always that concern. My feel is actually it may be growth existing alongside of the investment, and you get into a debate about, well, if an existing organisation wants to grow, that you face a risk of them decamping out of the borough. I think what the strongest thing for me though is retaining workforce within the town centre with the consequential benefits for footfall on the retail sector. So that is quite powerful, and I know you've had quite extensive discussions on the parking issue, but I think that this is a package that we've got to construct to really get us away. I wouldn't use the B word, but I think we need to develop a composite package to really market this office accommodation.
We won't use the B word.
Right.
We happy to accept the report without the B word in it? Whatever the B word is. Okay, the quality policy objectives. Sit on these.
Thank you, Chair. This is a refresh of the current quality scheme and the objectives. And in bringing this report, we've consulted with stakeholders, and there's broad agreement that the proposed policy and objectives are a positive approach to the equalities agenda. And on the objective, the council is required to publish a minimum of one equality objective every 4 years, and that objective for the next 4 years is to remind all members and staff of their duties under the Equalities Act 2010, demonstrate how the council has done this via training and engagement with service users, and support organisations and publicise the difference that this work has made. Of course, the policy sits alongside that, and the policy provides much fuller detail. So I move the recommendations in paragraph 7.
This shouldn't go that way. It wouldn't be turned it off. Turn it off. Any questions from you in the report?
Cindy, can you help us out?
You're a 4-year-old child when you need one. Okay, membership changes, I have no membership changes, and you have no membership changes. Supplementary items, we have one which is Nation Road, linked to relocation, Catmark, which is in Stevenage.
As members of the text, this report considers a proposal that would do a number of things. Firstly, facilitate the relocation of Catmark and the centre.
Excuse me, Councillor Harkin, could you speak up, please?
So this report considers a proposal that would facilitate the relocation of Catmark and the town centre. Secondly, give approval to council to acquire around 55 acres of land at Mission Road. And thirdly, to enable a mixed housing development at Mission Road site. As people will be aware, the council has for a long time had an objective to relocate Catmark from its current, now inappropriate location in the town centre. The current site has long been a cause of problems given it is in now a residential area. It is also restricting DFAM's ability to grow and expand, and more recently the wider regeneration opportunities at Bampton can't really proceed until this matter is resolved. The sale of the Mission Road site will give DFAM sufficient capital when supplemented with other funding that they have access to enable them to trigger a transfer from Clifton Road. The Mission Road site at present does have a conditional sale option in place with the National House Builder, and for this proposal to go ahead, that sale option needs to be resolved and an agreement on that has been reached. Once Clifton Road has been vacated by DFM, the council then has responsibility for that site, and the report notes that the council will then promptly clear the site, because I'm sure members are aware of the history and some of the tragedies that have happened on that site, and hence the intent when we get to that stage, the council will clear the site safely. So with that, Chair, can I move the recommendations which are in paragraphs 9 through to 11, and primarily for two reasons. Firstly, it will facilitate at long last the relocation of Catmark, and secondly, it will provide sites on which we can ensure build affordable and social housing.
On behalf of the very vast majority of residents of Park East Ward, I heartily welcome this report for us tonight. Why? Because it's the best chance in a generation to get the cattle market moved out of town. On behalf of the families who've lost their beloved sons, Jack Hunter and Kyle Hull, at the cattle mart, I welcome this report in the hope that we'll have no further injuries or accidents at that town center magnet for misadventure. And on behalf of the many near residents who've had years of disruption, noise, smells, and upset, I welcome these recommendations, which I hope will lead to the moving of the cattle mart to Humbledon Farm, which is a vastly more appropriate site for this day and age.
Yes, and can I agree with everything that Cindy has said? When I was first elected to this council, I was actually the ward member for South Ward in those days. So it's been going on that long. I'm not going to say how long it is, because you would probably say I've been here far too long. But it has been a long and tortuous journey, and I think everybody would welcome this. Can I just say, we had the briefing on this last night as well. I think the officers that have been involved in this deserve our congratulations, because it's taken an awful long time to get here. And there has obviously been some imagination and some compromises along the road, but hopefully, this is the last hurdle, and that we will soon see the move. And I think that the relocation to Humbledon Farm is ideal. There's opportunities for all kinds of things to go on there, no matter what differing views there are on this. But it's close to the main road, and cattle marts throughout the country have been struggling, and I think we've got to make sure that Darlington retains the cattle mart. I mean, in Cumbria there's quite a lot of them that have closed, and it's another thing. Darlington is a market town, and I know that this obviously market restriction and so forth is something that we've had to deal with, but Darlington is a market town, and the cattle mart is part of that. So yes, I welcome this.
Rather like yourself, when I was first elected, there were two issues that were on the boil. One of them was the leak in the East Street car park, and the other was the cattle market. But the East Street car park's still bloody leaking. But we might emphasise that, we might just this time get this one over the line. It's far from clear. An awful lot of work has gone into it. It's been like playing 3D chess with a blindfold on. If we can get it across the line, I think it will be a huge benefit of not just the people of Clifton Road to be there, but all those people who are being chased down Victoria Road by mad bullocks who've managed to escape. Public safety when they've had to be shot. And you know, those of us who lived in Darlington either all of our lives or many years will remember that that did happen. Thankfully, it doesn't happen as much now as it used to, but it was at one point quite a regular occurrence that people had to go and sadly stay in the speedwell for many hours just to make sure that the bullets were...
You're speaking from experience.
Chris.
Yeah, briefly, Chair. It was a point that Heather made actually, and that is relocation to a more appropriate site. And I think this is recognition that we as an authority recognise the importance of the farming and agricultural sector in terms of the economic contribution of this borough. I think it's about 9 or 10%, and to have them placed there is more appropriate for their business model and operation, and for their sort of economic sustainability. So we should welcome it from that perspective, as well as many of the other more quality of life issues that we've mentioned.
Can we agree with that? Questions? No? Okay, thank you for your attendance.